Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The War Bride's Oath. Episode 7. For a while, their little group stayed in the Muram village, helping in every way they could. When she was done healing those who could use her help inside the houses, Cecilia took a walk around the village, showing the women which wild plants could be propagated and used for herbal medicine, or to make tea to warm everyone up. Some women were already knowledgeable, so it was a quick tour, and soon, it became clear she had done all she could. She sighed, the women going back to prepare a larger pot of tea for everyone. Next to her, Nana stepped forward to hand her a little cup of water. "You're so talented," she muttered. "I understand better what they said about your mother being a legendary healer. My mom remembered the teaching of her ancestors and taught me and my siblings too. But it won't be enough to help this village. We can heal their wounds, but they will need more food soon. They should make a trip to the capital," exclaimed Nana. "Nowadays, they are trying to encourage the growth of more crops, like before. I can even ask one of my uncles who trades outside to come all the way here. If their lands can be farmed again, I'm sure they just need to buy new crops to start anew." "That would be nice, young lady," said the old woman, appearing at their side. "However, our lands have been ravaged. We wouldn't even know where to begin, between all the blood that has been spilled, and the soil that has to be dug. It will take us weeks until we can be ready to farm anything again." "That, we can help with." Cecilia smiled. To their surprise, she walked out, and Tessandra, who was smiling as well, obviously knew exactly what her cousin was going for because she followed right after her. Cecilia walked away for a bit, leaving the line of houses to get to the lands. As the old lady had said, there was no ground to cultivate from, yet. "Cray," she called out. "Nana, do you still have some food with you?" "I have a few more snacks, yes." "Why? Can I have it?" "Oh, is it for Sir Dragon?" "Of course." Cecilia took the little snacks, which were small and sweet versions of the beignet. Then, she walked up to the ravaged field, and dug as deep as she possibly could, with her hands, and buried one, before covering it back with the soil. She walked away, and did that again, until all 6 of the little snacks were hidden underground. Around the same time Cray arrived, tilting its head. "I don't understand," Nana whispered to Tessa. "She isn't expecting them to grow, right?" "You should step back, Nana," Tessa chuckled. "It's going to get a bit messy around here." Naptuni frowned, but carefully took a few steps back along with Tessandra, noticing Cecilia was doing the same now, walking up to them with a little smile. For a few seconds, nothing happened. In front of them, Cray had begun walking around the area, and sniffing the ground, deeply interested. She was shocked. The dragon could sniff the treats when Cecilia had buried them so deep. Yet, to her surprise, it suddenly began digging into the ground. It was so violent, Nana jumped back a little. With its tail wagging in the air, Cray's sharp claws violently ripped full wagon loads of soil out of the way. Such a large dragon was digging to get such a tiny snack. Naptuni was in awe. It was a bit funny, and also a bit scary. Quickly, Cray found the first of the snacks, and ate it right away, before sniffing the ground again to find the next one. That wasn't all. As the dragon dug out the second and third treats, Neptune realized Cecilia hadn't placed them in random spots. In fact, she had calculated how deep she should bury them, how much soil Cray would be able to dig out, and even from which direction the dragon would dig it, making sure they crossed paths. What she had thought to be some random digging game was now turning into a large-scale plan to completely labor the land, and it was unfolding in front of her eyes, in a matter of minutes. "This is amazing!" exclaimed Neptune. "I created this technique with my brothers when I was young," chuckled Cecilia. "Mother wanted to create new fields in the north, but we had to dig deep and it was really tiring for my older brothers and the workers. I noticed the dragons love to dig for treats, so I made several attempts to have them dig as a game. But we could only bring one dragon at a time or they ended up fighting and making a big mess. In the end, we hid a bunch in the lands, and it worked so well, we prepared large fields for farming." "So that's how you came up with that technique," laughed Tessandra. "No wonder the North became so prolific in just a few years, with dragons to do the work." "They had fun doing it," protested Cecilia. Even without her saying it, it was obvious. Cray was happily digging, making little mountains and deep trenches of soil all around, which meant a large area was already plowed. All the villagers who had been brave enough to come and observe were speechless. Cecilia turned to the older lady when the dragon was looking for its last treat. "Cray did a lot, but you will still have to work to bring this place back to what it was. It rains a lot in the area, so you can prepare to farm again and organize this land as you want. Many villages are probably in the same situation as yours, so you could try growing many different kinds of crops, and later become a reference for them. Prepare a lot more food for the nearby villages who will take longer to get back on their feet. You can establish this village as a future point of trade." For a few seconds, the old woman seemed a bit lost, and Ceci wondered if she should explain again. Yet, to her surprise, the older woman took a deep breath and bowed. Behind her, several villagers did the same, or even got on their knees, all showing deep respect and gratitude toward the princess. The whole area was silent, and Cecilia, shocked, took a step back. "No. Please, it's not necessary. Please let us thank you, my lady," said the old woman. "Without you, we would still be hiding in our houses in fright, instead of thinking of the future. And thank you for using such a noble creature to help us prepare to farm again. I promise we will work hard, and do our best from now on. Thanks to His Majesty and you, it feels like this kingdom might still face a new dawn after all we have endured. I hope I'll live long enough to see it." Cecilia felt horribly embarrassed, but when she glanced to the side, both Tessandra and Nana were smiling at her, clearly happy with this resolution too. "You're welcome," she muttered. "All right," said Tessa. "Ceci, it's starting to get late, and I see more of those dark clouds from earlier. We should go back now if we don't want to get caught in another storm." Quickly, they bid goodbye to the old lady and all the villagers they had met. Neptune once again promised to send them food from the Dorosafe tribe, and the Muram village thanked her too, as well as Tessa and Sabale, for their help. Cecilia had an odd feeling when Cray took off from the ground. She was glad they had been able to help this village, but their situation was probably the same as many others. Who would be able to help them all? This was an issue of a kingdom-wide scale. Some weren't even freed of the bandits yet. She couldn't imagine what those people had gone through, but she could see a glimpse of it in their eyes. Surely. Just like Tessa had predicted, the rain began to fall on their way back. Cray tried to fly quickly, not fond of that weather, either, but the black dragon couldn't spare them from the downpour. They were all a bit relieved when they finally landed on the outskirts of the outer capital, as the wind at least wasn't as terrible down there. "Bye-bye, Sir Dragon." Nana tried to wave her hand. Cray left them quickly, and Sabale suggested they rent horses to get back faster, which they agreed to. With Neptune riding behind Cecilia, they all departed quickly, hoping to reach the bridge soon. However, to their surprise, they were stopped by the royal guards, who refused to let them in. "Are you kidding?" roared Sabale. "These passes are perfectly fine. Which division do you belong to?" "They are not," retorted the guard calmly, his eyes going to Cecilia. Cecilia and Tessandra exchanged a look. There was no problem with their papers. Those guards were only set on not letting them through. While Sabale was bent on arguing with them, Tessa sighed and pulled his horse's bridle. "Stop it, Sab. Let's just try one of the other entries. We shouldn't have to. Our papers are fine." "I know they are, love, but that guy barely looked at them." "He looked at us. Either he has something against foreigners, or he was paid off. In any case, we aren't going back this way without causing a commotion. There are 3 other doors, right? Let's just try the closest one." The royal guard grunted, but the girls had already decided to let this go. In fact, they were all drenched already, and that only added to Sabale's frustration. They should have been getting back as soon as they could, but now they had to spend extra time under this downpour, in this unsecured area, and make an unnecessary detour. He was ashamed they had run into corrupt royal guards and internally swore he'd remember their faces for later. Luckily, the girls were calmer, and once they were on the way to the next bridge, no one mentioned what had happened. Or perhaps the rain and wind blew their frustrations away too. However, it was still a long way there. They kept riding next to the first wall that protected the city, the rain pouring down on them. Except for Nana, they all quickly realized they were being followed. At first, it was an uneasy feeling. Sabale had been nervous since they were refused entrance into the capital, but now, it was clear someone was chasing after them. They could hear horses, and see their pursuers coming from adjacent streets. It made no sense that more horses would be riding under this downpour to gather behind them unless they also couldn't get in at the previous door, which was unlikely. People who could afford horses shouldn't have to ride from one gate to another. "Ceci, keep going with Nana," Tessandra shouted, taking out her sword. Cecilia's horse accelerated, Nana holding on tightly behind her. Meanwhile, Tessandra slowed her horse until she and Sabale were riding next to each other. "There are a dozen of them, at least," she shouted to be heard. "Will you be all right? I should ask you that. You're cute." Sabale rolled his eyes and took out his own weapon. Of course, she would be fine. He was more worried for his little sister. Neptune had no fighting abilities, and he was pretty sure he had never seen the princess use a weapon, either, which explained why they weren't staying behind to fight as well. Tessandra was the fighter of the two. The first attack came from the corner of a street, taking them by surprise. A man stepped out at the last second, with a long sword. His target was Tessandra's horse, and the young woman moved quickly to save her leg from being cut too, knowing it was too late to save her mount. The horse was brutally stopped in its run by a large blade slicing its flank, and Tessa jumped. Her body made a perfect arc in the air, and she fell down brutally on top of the man, her blade going right for his heart. "Ceci, don't stop," she shouted. Cecilia nodded and had her horse speed up. While her cousin's horse rode farther away, she already had two more men going right for her. Bandits, by their looks. However, their weapons were new, and she was clearly their target. Those men had been paid off. Tessandra frowned and raised her sword, attacking first. She was strong, and those men were not a problem for her. What was more annoying was the slippery ground, the fact they were still outside of the capital, and she had no idea how many more enemies were targeting them. She couldn't stay here. "Tessa!" She raised her head, and to her surprise, Sabale, whom she thought to have been gone already, was coming back to her, riding his horse and holding his hand out to get her. Tessandra smiled and got ready to grab his hand. He rode past her, and in a perfect movement, she used his strength to swing and land behind him. As soon as she was seated behind him, she put a quick kiss on his cheek. "You came back for me?" she asked with a smile. "Not now, Tessa." "You so came back for me," she smiled, hugging him from behind with a satisfied expression. Sabale rolled his eyes, but as he was seated in front, Tessa couldn't see that he was smiling as well. He pulled the reins and had his horse turn around to try and catch up to the others. Who knew how many more attackers were waiting for them between there and the next gate? They had to find a way back into the capital, and quickly. Cecilia trusted Tessandra's fighting skills enough to leave her and Sabale behind, but she was more worried about Nana. The young girl had realized what was going on and was helplessly hanging on to her, maybe even crying. "What do they want? Why are they pursuing us?" Cecilia didn't have time to answer her. She was busy navigating their horse through a place she didn't know well at all, under the darkness of night and the downpour, riding as fast as possible to the next gate. She was worried more people were after them and targeting her. From the looks of it, this was all a setup. It was obvious that whoever had made sure they wouldn't be able to get back through the nearest door had also hired people to attack. Did someone spot Cray when they left? They wanted to get rid of her while she was far from the castle. In this downpour and that place, it would even take a while before they got worried about her and Tessa's disappearance. Her main thought was that she couldn't get Neptune involved. Although she was a candidate too, chances were low that she was those men's target. The royal guard from earlier had barely glanced at her. Cecilia was glad they had chosen to rent horses. Otherwise, she couldn't imagine the nightmare of escaping those men on foot. She glanced up, but they wouldn't make it out by the sky, either. Even if she tried to call Cray now, the dragon wouldn't possibly hear her. They were on their own. She heard the pounding of several hooves on the streets of cobblestone and glanced over her shoulder. It wasn't Tessa, but more pursuers. Why were there so many of them? What had become of her cousin? Had she and Sabale chosen another way back? All the streets were so similar. If it wasn't for Nana guiding her from time to time, she wouldn't have known where to go. It was getting late and dark too. The streets were getting darker and more intimidating around them, flooded by the rain that wasn't stopping. Cecilia clenched her teeth and had the horse accelerate, more determined than ever. "Ceci!" She heard Nana cry a bit behind her, and she could feel the fear in her voice. It ought to be scary, both their situation and their speed, but they couldn't slow down. Cecilia had thought about it, but she couldn't part with Nana, who didn't know how to ride the horse alone. They had to keep riding until they saw the door, or when Tessandra and Sabale appeared. She didn't even have a weapon to defend herself with. Even her hands had turned back to normal already, her claws and scales gone. Suddenly, she heard Nana shout, and something flew past her shoulder. An arrow. "Nana! Are you okay?" "My shoulder." Nana was hit? Cecilia panicked, but just as she was trying to look behind her, their horse whined loudly, and suddenly pitched up without warning. Cecilia tried to hang on to the bridle, but it was no use. The horse completely collapsed onto its side, and she felt Nana fall off before she did. She heard a scream, 1 second before her own body fell. Cecilia's head hit the ground, brutally. She felt the pain resonate in her whole body, and right after, another wave of pain came, from her lower body this time. Something heavy fell on top of her, crushing her and making her gasp for air. "Ceci!" She looked around, trying to see Nana, but her voice had definitely come from above, and Cecilia's body was stuck in the opposite direction, toward the ground. "Nana, run! I'm fine, go!" "But…" "Run!" Cecilia roared. The young woman hesitated but took a step back, and turned around, running away while holding her injured shoulder. Cecilia thought she saw the shaft of an arrow sticking out, but she wasn't sure. For now, she was pressed against the ground by the horse on top of her, barely able to see anything. She could feel the steps and horses running her way. She tried to move, to get out of there. If her arm wasn't already trapped underneath, she could have lifted that horse off of her. The whole horse's dead weight was pinning her down, and a normal woman would have been completely unable to move, but Cecilia was stronger than the norm. Grunting and ignoring all the pain in her body, she was fighting to free herself. The downpour felt like it was trying to pin her down too. Each movement let her know of an injury in another part of her body, which made her worried that getting out of there would be for nothing. She could tell her ankle was broken, at the very least, and perhaps a rib or two. She couldn't believe how bad her situation had gotten in minutes. She couldn't die here. She kept trying to push the huge weight off of her with one arm, grunting and panting in the flooded street, looking out for the enemies running her way. She was out of time, and Tessa was nowhere in sight. "Ceci!" That voice sent a cold shiver down her spine. Cecilia struggled to turn around, and spotted, from the corner of her eye, Nana's silhouette running back toward her. "Nana, no!" she shouted. "I can't leave you!" cried the young girl. She was already by her side, and trying her best to pull the horse. Cecilia was shocked. She couldn't believe the young woman was back, in tears and probably terrified, but still there. She was in awe at Nana's bravery, but this was suicide. The men were almost there. She turned her head, seeing their figures almost on them. They were both going to get killed any minute now. Suddenly, a large shadow jumped over them. The largest black horse she'd ever seen jumped in the middle of the opponent, and silver lightning immediately sliced one of them in two. The action was so fast, their attackers were thrown into complete disarray. The horses panicked, the men shouted, yelled, trying to face the threat. Their weapons were swung around recklessly, unable to take a hold of him. It was like a god of death had appeared among them. An imposing figure, with a black cloak covering him. The large blade was moving swiftly, flying in the air and sending blood and limbs to the ground. Swish, swish, swish. It seemed like he was cutting through men, weapons, and the rain alike. Someone screamed, and orders were shouted to retreat, but that wouldn't happen. There was nowhere to flee and no way they could escape from that monster among them. Still pressed against the cold cobblestone, Cecilia could only witness the scene. His large stature as he jumped down from his horse, and when the hood fell back, his white hair flew around him like a mane. He was moving at an impressive speed, yet each of his movements was graceful, perfect. A dance of death defeating all their enemies, leaving them no hope of survival. The teachings of a war god sharpened to perfection. Cecilia was so fascinated, she had completely forgotten about her pain and struggle, just to watch him. Ashen's fighting stance was fueled by his anger, making him both captivating and scary. She held her breath at each movement of his sword, each time she could see his dark, dangerous eyes shining. The White King was right in front of her, saving her and leaving her breathless, mesmerized. She had to watch his back, mostly, as he refused to move from where he stood, using his long sword to reach all enemies and standing like a wall to defend her. From panic, Cecilia's heartbeat had switched to a different tune, still so fast, but for a different reason now. When the last enemies turned around, desperate to flee, he grabbed a blade abandoned on the ground and threw it like a spear across the street. A scream echoed back, and a dull sound. Then, he turned around and ran to cover the short distance between them. His expression changed from anger to fear as he reached her side. "Cecilia! Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she grunted, remembering that horse on top of her. Ashen glared at the dead horse and moved to push it off her. Compared to what Nana had been trying to do earlier, he single-handedly pushed it out of the way as if it was nothing. The young woman stepped back, intimidated. She could only witness silently as the king put one knee down in front of Cecilia. They were both in a mess, soaked and bloodied, but right now, those two looked like they were part of a different world, something she couldn't intrude on. His movements to get Cecilia out of there were incredibly gentle. He carefully brushed her wet curls away from her face and pulled her into his embrace. The king's eyes, which forever looked angry, now looked as if he was the one in pain. He was touching the princess as if she was the most precious and fragile thing in the world, frowning at each wound his eyes uncovered. "How come you're?" Cecilia muttered. "I saw your dragon from the castle." "Who did this?" Cecilia shook her head. For now, she was too exhausted, injured, and soaked to care. Ashen grunted, but very gently, he took off his cloak to put over her, wrapping her body in it as much as he could, trying to be careful. It was no use, though. Cecilia grimaced, her body aching all over. The king's hands froze, and his expression fell. He looked as if he was torn apart, and lowered his head. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She froze, hearing those words so faintly she thought she had dreamed them. Yet, rather than standing back up right away, Ashen was hugging her, his face buried against her shoulder. She could feel his clenched fists on the coat, and his shoulders shaking. She could even feel and hear his erratic breathing. Was it anger, or frustration? Was he thinking what had happened here was his fault? Cecilia's heart missed a beat. This was the first time she'd seen him so vulnerable. Despite the pain, she moved her hand over his neck. As soon as she touched his head, Ashen's entire body froze. She slowly caressed the hair over his nape, to comfort him. Even wet, it was smooth under her fingers. Cecilia had been wanting to touch his white hair since she had seen him again. She wanted to remember how close they used to be and discover the man he had become since. She wanted to feel the touch of his skin, the shape of his muscles underneath, and learn his smell. Right now, Ashen smelled of blood, sweat, and rain. For a while, he didn't dare move, and the two of them remained like that, in the rain, simply holding each other gently. Then, he pulled his face away from her shoulder, his dark, mysterious eyes staring at her with a complex expression. Cecilia wished she could get a grasp of the thoughts behind those eyes. Ashen was looking at her with so much emotion in his eyes, yet all of it felt like a secret she couldn't seize. For a second, his lips parted, and he leaned forward, their faces so close she thought he was going to kiss her. Ashen sighed and pulled back a bit. He finally lifted her, holding Cecilia in his arms, so she could lean against his shoulder. He wasn't putting any distance between them, but now, his eyes were looking beyond her, in front. Cecilia didn't care much at this instant. She simply didn't want to move. His warmth and tight embrace were the most comforting place right now, that was all she needed. Her dragon blood was working to ease the pain of her injuries, but it couldn't numb it or make her feel safe like Ashen's presence did. She felt all the anxiety, fear, and panic from earlier slowly lifting from her body. It was as if something previously lost had been rebuilt between them. She trusted him completely to keep her safe now. Ceci. Tessandra came running from the other street, only to find her cousin already tightly wrapped in the king's arms. She stopped, glancing at Cecilia's relaxed expression. The princess seemed half asleep, and carried like a precious package, while the king looked like he wouldn't let go of her for anything in the world. Tessandra hesitated. Perhaps her cousin couldn't hear her. She glared at the white-haired king, but after a hesitation, she didn't say anything. Instead, she glanced around. Her eyes went around the dead horse, Neptune standing alone a couple of steps farther, and all the scattered bodies. She had enough knowledge about battlefields to be able to quickly catch a grasp of what had happened here. She sighed, and with a sullen expression, put her sword back in its sheath. Behind her, Sabale arrived a bit late, only to see the king already turning away. It was a lonely scene in the street. Neptune scampered to join Tessa's side, making a detour to not get in the king's way. No one said a word. The three of them, left behind, simply watched the king's lonely figure carrying Cecilia away. The king's horse, completely fine, was left behind with them. Ashen had no intention to ride back and risk making the princess' injuries more painful. Carrying Cecilia, he walked alone, all the way back to the castle, not showing an ounce of fatigue. Even with his white hair, some people rushing in the streets glanced twice, but most didn't even notice their monarch walking amongst them. The downpour was making everyone run home and not care for anything else. He was the only one making his way up to the castle. "You shouldn't have gone out," he muttered. Cecilia's eyes opened faintly. Through the thin window of vision she had under the cloak, she recognized the streets of the inner capital already. Her injuries weren't as painful anymore, but the healing process had gotten her tired. She sighed. "Ashen, I can walk." "No." She had expected this much, and she didn't feel like fighting him. She didn't mind him carrying her. Instead, she was more worried at how drenched the king was, and how cold his body had gotten. "You shouldn't have gone out of the castle without telling me," he muttered again. "I was worried. You didn't leave me much room to talk. You could have sent a servant to me. I don't trust them." To her surprise, he sighed. In front of them, the guards opened the gates, not hiding their surprise at their king's appearance. "I know." Without adding a word, he climbed the stairs of the castle, taking her through the maze of corridors. She didn't know where they were going, but she quickly realized it wasn't the cerulean suite. After a while, some servants stepped aside to open a door. "No one is allowed to enter," he hissed. The doors were closed behind them, and Cecilia tried to look around. It was a small room, with a large chimney, a simple canopy bed with heavy curtains, a large fur rug, and a couple of seats. The only decorations were the few draperies on the walls, and the large blade hung next to them, similar to the one Ashen carried. Someone had already lit a fire in the room, and despite the rain blowing against the window, it was quite warm in there. Ashen gently carried her to one of the large leather seats, putting Cecilia down as carefully as he could. To her surprise, he simply stayed there, down on one knee, in front of her. As soon as he had put her down, it was as if he didn't dare touch her anymore. She took off the cloak herself, feeling a bit stuffy now with the fire next to them. Ashen frowned as her injuries were uncovered again. "Don't get yourself hurt again," he muttered. "I didn't choose to be in this situation," she sighed. He remained mute for a few minutes, his fists clenched. "I will find who did this." "I'll find them myself," said Cecilia. "This is my problem." "It is mine too. I wanted you to stay. I didn't think you'd get hurt." "Ashen." Cecilia grabbed his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. His dark eyes looked full of pain each time he looked at her, and only when he looked at her. She could almost hear him suffering inside. He put his hand over hers, without pushing it away, simply caressing her skin. "I'm the one who chose to stay," she said, "but you didn't give me a reason to, yet." He took a deep breath, and very slowly, turned his head, kissing her palm. The contact of his lips sent shivers down her back. The pain and cold from earlier were almost forgotten already, replaced by this delicious warmth between them. Her heart that had calmed down accelerated a little. "Stay with me tonight," he muttered. "Please." Ceci's throat tightened a little. She wasn't prepared to see Ashen like this, almost begging at her feet. The king who looked so fierce while killing 24 murderers now looked completely helpless and at her mercy. Why was it that he showed this part of him only when the two of them were alone? Cecilia tried to take a deep breath in. She nodded and, very slowly, leaned forward to kiss his lips. There was something empowering about making the next move, and knowing she was the one giving him the right to kiss her or not. Ashen almost seemed to hesitate, but very quickly, he recovered and kissed her back. It was a long, tender kiss. A kiss that tasted like rain and firewood. Ashen's lips were almost hesitant as if he was prepared for Cecilia to pull back at any moment. She didn't. The princess just wanted to feel him, to feel his warmth against her lips, against her skin. Without even thinking about it, their hands found each other on her knee, and they intertwined their fingers. Ashen sat completely at her feet, while Ceci was leaning forward to reach him. He was tall enough that she didn't have to lean too much, and their bodies met halfway. She even caressed his white hair which she adored, and his hand softly held her lower back too. After a short while, they parted, both much calmer now. A few inches between them, they didn't sit back completely, still leaning toward each other, as if they couldn't bear to part anymore. Ashen sighed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She was telling the truth. Her dragon blood was numbing and healing all the injured parts of her body. The most painful was her broken ribs, being mended together at a much faster pace than the norm. Ashen frowned, looking like he was the one in pain once more. He shook his head and put his forehead against her knee, his white hair falling down his shoulders. "I shouldn't have let you go through this," he groaned. "I knew all those wretched women were going to come after you if I showed you even just a bit of interest, but—" "Ashen," Cecilia called him angrily, "don't ignore me because of some other women. Don't pretend that is the only reason, either." "I didn't mean it like that," he sighed, raising his dark eyes to her. I really wasn't prepared to see you again, Ceci. I left the Dragon Empire angry, bitter, but most of all, I missed you like crazy. I missed you each day, hour, minute since I had to leave. I dreamt of you every night, and even during the day. I never thought I would get to see you again, not unless I came to get you myself. And now, here you are, a full-grown woman, appearing at a time in my life when I thought I would have to settle with another woman." "Like Giselle?" she asked angrily. "No," he protested. "It's true Giselle has. She has been by my side for a while now, and she's—" "Ceci, she's nothing like you, I swear. I don't love her." "You slept with her." Her words were like a dagger in his heart, but he couldn't deny or avoid the princess' anger. He lowered his head. I don't want to lie to you," he muttered. Cecilia made a sour expression, and turned her face to the fire, disappointed. She knew it since she had seen Giselle by his side, but it was still bitter to hear the confirmation. She took back her hand and clenched her fists on her skirt, tightly, refusing to look at him. She knew she had to calm the anger in her heart first. "Have you slept with her since I arrived?" "No." Ashen had shouted so loud she jumped. She finally looked at him, but the king looked almost horrified by her words. Cecilia, do you think I'd have an ounce of desire left for any other woman now that you're here? Do you have any idea what you do to me? He grabbed her hands, not forcefully, but holding them in his grasp, looking her right in the eye. Cecilia, there's only you. It's only been you, all this time. You've been the only one on my mind, even when I held other women to satisfy my desires. Yes, I slept with others, and I did it without an ounce of love for them. Not even 1,000th of what I feel for you. I've been so cruel to those women who tried to get something out of me, and I can't even feel sorry. I did it because I was desperate that it couldn't be you in my arms. Cecilia's heartbeat accelerated a bit at the thought of this. She hated that he had slept with other women, but she loved that he thought about her each time he did. It was a horrible feeling, a bittersweet mix of anger, pain, and envy. Even if she hated each one of them, she couldn't help but be jealous of those women. She had come here knowing what it would imply, to be the White King's woman. Worse, she desired it too. Even when I tried to forget, he continued, the memories of you came back to hit me even harder. The more I tried, the harder it was to forget you. 1,000 times, I tried to imagine what it would be like if one day I could finally go back to the Empire. Each time I imagined you possibly falling for another man, or getting married while I was stuck here because of the war. Sometimes it hurt so much I thought I'd go insane. What about the competition? She asked, her voice a bit more hoarse than she'd have wanted. Ashen scoffed bitterly. Not my choice. My position is more fragile than it looks. All the main families want me to have an heir, to have one of their descendants as my heir. That's the only way they'd leave me alone and stop fighting me, I guess. The problem is, they all want me to marry one of their daughters. So I let them decide to have that stupid competition. I couldn't have cared less for who won, until you came. His expression softened, and he raised his hand. After a hesitation, and seeing Cecilia wasn't backing away, he gently caressed her cheek. His large, warm hand against her cheek sent delicious shivers down her spine, and she put her hand over his. I'm sorry, he muttered. She was a bit surprised at his sudden apologetic tone but waited to let him speak. Ashen's expression looked so tired, something that had nothing to do with the earlier fight. The White King looked exhausted overall, but right in this moment, all of him was leaning toward her, and he was leaning against her legs, the two of them sharing each other's warmth in front of the burning fire. I'm sorry, he repeated. I couldn't believe it when I saw you here. Even now, I'm scared your father or your brothers will appear, and take you away from me, a second time. I never thought Yasim would bring you all the way here, and I never thought I would have a chance to have you. But I wanted you to, she muttered. I don't care about the competition either, Ashen. I came here because I still love you too. I really thought you had sent Yasim to ask me to marry you. If I had thought it was possible, I would have married you the second you came. Why do you say it like that? Look at yourself, Cecilia. You haven't been here for a week, and you almost got killed already. I want you. I want you more than anything in this world. But, but I was foolish enough to agree to this competition, and you too. Now, every single one of them will have put a target on your back and try to kill you. If something happens to you, I won't forgive myself. I won't come back from it, Cecilia. At least, in the Dragon Empire, you were safe. But here Ashen, look at me, she ordered. He raised his head again and met the princess' eyes, her emerald irises glowing with the fire's light in them. She held his hand against her cheek, but her stare on him was fierce. She was like a queen looking at her servant, confident and strong. I won't lose to them, she said. Those women can't defeat me. I won't be killed, either. And I know you're trying hard to save your kingdom too. I don't want to take that away from you, Ashen. Cecilia, you don't understand. I may be the king, but most of them don't want me. I had to establish myself through fear. I went to the Muram village today. Ashen's expression fell. Why did you go there? I wanted to know how you won all those fights so fast. I saw you being trained by my dad. I saw how you fought tonight too. You're strong, Ashen, but you're not a god. Tell me the truth. Why did you let that women drug those men? Ashen looked in complete shock. He tried to take his hand away from her face, but this time, Cecilia held his wrist. She used just the right amount of strength, so he would have to use force to free himself. He didn't. Instead, he stared at the princess, a bit shocked. Her bright green eyes left him no room to escape, and no room for lies, either. She already knew the truth. It was the fastest way, and the safest one for the villagers too, he muttered. Ashen. I didn't want to use that method. I swear, Cecilia, I didn't, but half my kingdom is occupied by them, and the rest is dying of hunger. What was I supposed to do? It took me 5 years just to regain control of the capital and its surroundings, and you have no idea how hard it was. You can't drug your opponents to win a fair fight. Those men don't deserve a fair fight, Ceci. Didn't you hear what they did? Can you be sure that's what they did, each one of them? If those men are half of your people, Ashen, what do you think made them like this in the first place? Where do you think they came from? His expression fell. He knew all too well. Those men he had slaughtered were like any other citizen, just a few years ago. Citizens who had grown tired of hunger, citizens who couldn't live like they used to anymore. Those men had lived through wars, civil wars, and his own father's tyranny. Some had become soldiers while hoping for a better future, but their futures had been ruined by war itself. They had been ruined by his predecessor's greed and mistakes, and he was the last one left to try and suture a bleeding wound. He was alone to mend what had been shattered by 20 years of wrong rulers, and he was seen as a king himself. His father's blood had been a curse he couldn't get rid of, while Cecilia's parents' teachings had been his only blessing. I tried, Ceci. I swear, I tried so hard, I almost got killed 100 times. I used every single thing your father taught me. I did everything right. For so long, I tried to lead each battle while giving what you call a fair fight. Each time, I put my life on the line, with the fear my homeland would die with me. Look. He stood up into the light showing her all of his scars. Cecilia had already seen them before, but it still hurt each time she had to see them. Some were so large, or so long, she couldn't believe he had survived that. There wasn't a part of his body that wasn't covered in those white lines, some over the previous ones. His body was that of a warrior 10 years older that had gone to war for most of his life. Ashen wasn't old enough to have this many scars. This is what I got, from trying to heal this kingdom the right way. For a while, I got drunk on battles, you know. Fighting was easier than doing nothing, and being left alone with the memories of you, but after a while, it became my nightmare. One fight after another, every day, as if my life had been nothing but a succession of fights. I fought mercenaries by day, assassins by night. For each time I was grateful for your father's teachings, I couldn't help but remember he had a dragon too. I didn't have a dragon or even a real friend to help me. When Giselle came up with this idea, I realized this would make it all easier, faster. I said yes, because I was tired, and I thought if I was, my people were also probably begging for me to deliver them faster. No, Ashen, she said, standing up. Shouldn't he have agreed? There are so many ways to win fights. Without dragons, without drugs and poisons. Ashen took a step back, shaking his head helplessly. Cecilia, please, please, you have to understand. This isn't the empire you know. What you saw at the Muram village. It's the same everywhere. I tried everything I could before it came to this. Each time I offered to take prisoners, I left them a chance to put down their weapons. Half of the time, they didn't listen, and when they did, it was to try and trick me. He brushed his white hair back with a tired look. I know it's not ideal, Cecilia. I know it's nothing like what I would have wanted to show you. But this is the best I could do. It was the painful and hard way, but slowly, I've done it. I became king, and I made all the lords of the strongest clans listen to me. I've brought peace to this country. No. He looked up, but the princess looked almost angry. You brought nothing but fear. And fear brings more anger. No, he shook his head. Cecilia, you don't know what it's like. You've never faced men like these, your country hasn't known war since you were born. Your family has dragons for every fight they face. You don't know what it's like to put your life on the line, every day. I know. He frowned, confused. Cecilia sighed and left the coat on the seat. Slowly, she pulled her hair back. Her fingers were trembling a bit, but her expression was determined. She took a deep breath and began to undo the clasp of her choker, behind her neck. I don't think you understand, she muttered. The girl you knew was only 13 years old. It's true I didn't know much, back then. But I wasn't afraid of anything. I didn't fear going to your kingdom, either. I thought it would be fine as long as I was with you. That night, I left the Onyx Castle, in secret, with my dragon. Ashen's expression fell. No, he muttered. No. I waited. I waited several nights at the spot we had promised to meet, Cecilia, but you never came. I thought you had decided not to follow me. I wanted to follow you, she said in a cry. I was ready to leave my family, my parents, and my country to follow you." She took off her choker, and he took another step back, horrified. His heart sank in his chest. Where the grand, golden choker had been just before was nothing but a large, horrible scar all the way around her throat. After looking for a few seconds, he realized it wasn't a large scar, but dozens of long scars, left in the same spot. As if her throat had been cut open, repeatedly. Cecilia's hand came to touch her throat, briefly, as if to remember it herself. "I tried to come," she muttered, "but see." She stuttered that letter several times, as if it was too painful to pronounce. After a while, she took a deep breath, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "See. Cease, and I didn't make it." Ashen's dark eyes couldn't leave the sight of those scars. He was horrified, mortified. His years on the battlefield were more than enough to know this was not the result of any ferocious beast or accident. Those were the clear, clean cuts only a proper blade could make. He slowly shook his head, unable to understand. "No," he muttered. "It can't be. Your brother took you home, to the castle. You didn't come." "I really wanted to," Cecilia cried, brushing her long curls back. "I wanted to, Ashen. I didn't even think much before I left. I knew my parents would be mad, but I didn't want to be separated from you. When I understood my dad and my brothers made you leave the country, and we didn't even get to say goodbye, I couldn't bear it. I cried, and I panicked. I knew you'd be waiting for me, I wasn't ready to let you go at all." Ashen couldn't even believe what he was hearing. The younger Cecilia hadn't left him. Worse, she had tried to join him, when all those years he had thought she had made the opposite choice. He had seen her being taken home, without a word, by her brother, but he had never expected the 13-year-old girl had really left the safety of her home to come and find him. Now, he was scared to hear what had befallen her because of that decision. What happened? Cecilia took a deep breath and swallowed with difficulty. She had a hard time breathing, let alone speaking. She was struggling and kept crying silently, brushing her hair back nervously, with her trembling fingers. As much as he wanted to run and comfort her, Ashen felt like he had no right to. Not until he heard it all. There was this invisible barrier between them, something he couldn't cross, and his legs wouldn't take him there. The princess glanced at the fire. She had been avoiding his gaze since that heavy piece of gold had fallen to the floor. "I was captured midway," she muttered, "close to the border. 3 men appeared, grabbed me, and pinned me down. My dragon tried to attack them to defend me, but they used me as a shield. One of them cut me, just once. But when they realized dragon scales appeared on my body, and my dragon was affected too, they used it as a way to control her." She shivered. Her face had gone white, as if she was going to be sick just from remembering this. Ashen finally took a step forward, raising his hand and wanting to at least touch her, but Cecilia wrapped her arms around herself and took a step back. She shook her head slowly. I can't remember how many times they did this. Every time I healed, they would cut my throat again, to scare her, to scare my Cease. They wanted to capture her, but dragons only obey their owner, so they forced her to obey through me. I bled so much. I passed out several times. Ashen's nails were digging deep cuts into his palm from the anger. The Cecilia in front of him looked completely helpless, and he couldn't bear to imagine what she had gone through. He couldn't believe she had been tortured, and so young. Not only her but her dragon as well. Dragons were like their humans' counterpart. If Cecilia was hurt, Cease must have been going through the same pain her owner did. Dragons share their energy and strength with their owner when they are injured. I don't really know how it can be, but that's why our scales are the same color as theirs. Cecilia closed her eyes, frowning and looking like she was reliving that pain all over again. I begged them to stop, she cried. I felt my dra. I felt my Cease was in too much pain to save me, she couldn't take it. Her throat had begun to bleed too, without even a cut there. Ashen was just as shocked. Dragon scales were amongst the thickest materials, most blades couldn't cut through them. Yet, Cecilia's dragon's throat had begun to bleed as a response to what its master was going through, and how much it tried to save her. How long had those two been tortured? He couldn't even imagine the scene. Ashen had known Cease, and he had always seen them together. The dragon was a reflection of its owner. Beautiful, graceful, kind, and strong. Cease was completely devoted to Cecilia, those two were like one soul in two different bodies. He couldn't even bear to imagine the scene, the horror they had suffered, to try and save the other. Cecilia covered her eyes with her palms, trying to calm down her tears, but it was all in vain. She couldn't stop crying, big tears flowing out now, her shoulders shaking. Dad came too late, she cried. My dad and brothers found us both and killed those men, but Cease was all ready, she didn't move at all. I cried. I passed out, I had lost too much blood and my throat wasn't healing anymore because she didn't have Ceci's power anymore. Cecilia's dragon blood couldn't keep up with the injury, meaning she had been left to bleed out like a normal human being. Ashen's eyes fell on the scars again, a horrible sight he couldn't look away from. There were so many scars on top of one another. Perhaps 20, or 30, he couldn't even tell. They were all spread out around her throat on the front half, showing how repeatedly Cecilia had been sliced there. If those were the results of when Cease couldn't share her pain to heal her, this meant this was only a portion of what she had really endured. Ashen's legs gave out under him. The White King fell down to his knees, shocked and crushed. He had no idea. All these years, he had only felt sorry for himself and regretted 1,000 times Cecilia not being by his side. But she had tried to be. The reckless, enamored, 13-year-old girl she was, had been ready to give up everything to follow him, and what had she gotten in return? Torture and pain, a tremendous, unmeasurable amount of pain. Ashen couldn't even breathe, choked up by his guilt. Nothing was as he thought. Cecilia had said it before, he only felt sorry for himself. He only realized that now. He had held on to that dream where Cecilia was growing happily, surrounded by her family's love and free of any hardships, when in truth, she had lost so much already. Her dragon, and her voice. Cecilia's hand moved down to touch her scars with trembling fingers. My mom tried to save me. She spent many days healing me, comforting me. We temporarily left the north and the Onyx Castle to stay at the Imperial Palace. I couldn't talk. My throat hurt so much, I couldn't utter a sound for nearly 2 years. I got depressed from seeing my siblings' dragons, so I spent more time with Tessa, or with my grandmother. I got better with time. After that, and my throat had healed, it became clear I was healed here, but... Cecilia sighed, and let her hands fall to her sides, shaking her head slowly. I can't forgive myself because I lost Cease. I was too selfish and dumb. My dragon died because of me, and for a while, I couldn't get any scars. Cecilia suddenly opened her hands, showing her palms. For a second, Ashen was confused, until he saw the cuts that followed the natural lines. Because we couldn't understand what happened to my dragon or save her with our own ways, Dad let Cray take her to the Dragon's Lake, in the Imperial Palace. There's a legend that a dragon god used to live there, with immense power that could even resuscitate people. My parents believe in that legend. At first, I really hoped it could work. When Cray put my Cease in the lake, she drowned, but a few days later, I began growing scales again when I was injured. I kept injuring myself to see if my scales would turn another color than black, but Ashen understood. If Cease was to come back alive, the scales would have taken Cecilia's dragon's real color. However, it had been 5 years now. He had seen her scales, still as dark as coal. Cecilia sighed, shaking her head. She looked a bit calmer now, but her fingers were still trembling, and she didn't even try to wipe the tears off her face. I can't heal like the others do, she confessed. Tessa is very protective of me because she knows that I have those black scales, but it's nothing like before. She sighed, shaking her head. My voice. I can't speak like before either. Mother says it's a condition that's in my heart, not my throat. I just can't. I can't speak like before. It's all right. Ashen jumped back to his feet. He couldn't feel sorry for himself, not anymore. He didn't want to show Cecilia any more of that self-pity, when she was the one truly in pain, the one who had endured all those hardships alone. He approached her and, very carefully, after seeing that she wouldn't reject his touch, he gently put his hands around her neck, on the sides of her scars. He glared at them, wishing he could wipe it off, and all the terrible memories behind it. He took a deep breath and looked up at Cecilia, his thumb rubbing the tears off her jawline gently. It's all right, Cecilia, I am so sorry for what you went through. I'm really sorry. She raised her big green eyes at him, and Ashen felt his heart falling. If I had known, he muttered, I wouldn't have asked you to follow me. Not. I didn't realize. I was young, arrogant, and blinded by my feelings for you. I had this stupid idea that you and we could do it together. I didn't even consider you were too young and too fragile to endure this. When I got back, and I got thrown into war once more. Several times, I regretted not having you with me, and at the same, I felt thankful you were far from this hell. I really had no idea. Cecilia put her hands on his and shook her head. That was my mistake, Ashen. I didn't listen to my parents. I was blind too. I just thought about how brutally we were separated, and I just wanted to see you, even if it was only one last time. For a few seconds, the two of them remained silent, just staring at each other with complex feelings. Now that everything between them was out in the open, it felt like a fresh wind had been blown, bringing something a bit new to their relationship. Something a bit exciting, and different. The warmth of the fire and Ashen's hands on her skin were starting to get to Cecilia. She could feel the gentleness in his fingers, and in his dark eyes, read the tormented king's thoughts. He looked torn apart, staring at her with regret, guilt, and adoration. He wasn't good at hiding his emotions from her, and right now, she could easily read his bittersweet feeling, the sour expression he was making while caressing her wet cheeks. Cecilia leaned forward, hoping for a kiss, but Ashen suddenly pulled back. He was still holding her neck, cupped in his hands, but he had stepped back right away, with an almost frightened expression. Ashen! I can't, Cecilia, he muttered. I can't ask you to stay with me. No, she declared strongly before he could add a word to that. No. Don't push me away because you pity me. I don't pity you, he protested. I am responsible for what happened to you, Cecilia. I have just thrown my anger at you since you came, when I had no reason to. I had no idea what you went through, and I just acted like the self-centered I am. How can I even dare to keep you with me now? Ashen. She grabbed his face, angrily staring at him and forcing him to look at her. I came here, she said. I chose to see you again, and I don't regret it. Despite what happened to me, I still regretted that I couldn't see you. I missed the boy I fell in love with back then. I missed you too. Don't decide what is better for me now, or what you can do or not. Things are different now. I am an adult, and I came here because I really wanted to. When Yasum came and said you needed a queen, I knew I had to come. She let out a long sigh and lowered her hands to his exposed torso, her fingers lingering on the long lines of his scars. The king calmed down a little, and gently moved his hands down to her shoulders, holding her gently. I understand, you have been through many hardships too, she whispered. My dad made you leave when you were only 17, still a boy. I don't want to say I am the only one who got through hardships, I know things were different here. I talked a lot with Nana too, and she told me about it. Plus, I know you could have killed those men without even a fight. I'm sure that woman knows poisons that could have spared you a fight, but you didn't choose that. She smiled, a bit weakly given the circumstances, but she didn't want to hang on to those heavy feelings in her heart. She wished it could be blown away, like the rain and wind battering against the windows. She touched the tips of Ashen's silver-white hair. So it turned completely white after all, she muttered. It's pretty. I like it. He covered her hand with his. So you really still have feelings for me? Cecilia nodded. You thought I didn't? I don't know. I was scared, he muttered. Each time I had found peace, it ended up slipping through my fingers again. I don't think I'll be able to handle it if I lose you a second time. You won't, she whispered. Cecilia sighed, and took a step forward, nestling against Ashen's torso. After a hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her, and tightly embraced her. She closed her eyes, feeling Ashen's moist, hot sigh against her temple. He cradled her head while she leaned on his shoulder, his fingers softly grasping her brown curls. The two of them stood like this, by the fire, hugging each other in silence. They didn't even need to kiss. Right now, all Cecilia wanted was Ashen's smell surrounding her, his strong but gentle arms, and the quietness of being just the two of them in this room. After a while, she felt him move, and he lifted her up, carrying her to the bed. Cecilia didn't resist at all, even as he sat her on the edge of the mattress, and with one knee down, helped her get rid of her shoes, very gently. She couldn't help but grimace when her ankle moved. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "I think I broke my left ankle, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It will be healed by tomorrow morning." Ashen nodded, visibly satisfied. Then, he stood up and grabbed a clean piece of clothing to give her. Cecilia frowned while receiving it. It was clearly a man's tunic, much too long for her. "For you to change into," he said. "You'll get sick if you sleep in these clothes, and I don't really trust my self-control if you end up." Just as he said that, he took off his own shoes, deliberately looking away. Cecilia tilted her head, a bit intrigued. He really wasn't going to peek at all? She felt a bit dejected and a bit happy at the same time. Although they were going to spend the night together, it seemed like the king was resolute on really only sleeping together. She chuckled but changed into that piece of clothing anyway. The truth was, she had never been in front of a man, and felt nervous, even if Ashen really was turning away from her. Not only that, but a part of her was somewhat jealous of all those women who had done things with him in this bed before. When he finally turned back and came to join her, Cecilia was still frowning at his side of the bed. "What is it? Do you want me to change the bedding?" he frowned. "I don't like it," she muttered. "You've slept with other women here." "I haven't." Cecilia frowned as he lay next to her, facing her in the bed. They were just a few inches away from each other, but Ashen didn't try to get any closer, sticking to his side of the bed as if he was worried about crossing some invisible border. He chuckled, facing her. In the darkness behind the bed's curtains, he looked even more mysterious, while his white hair had golden reflections from the fire. "I've had sex with many women, but not in this bed. I can't stand sleeping with someone else in the same room, unless it's that 13-year-old girl who'd sneak into my bed under the cover of night." It took Cecilia a short while to realize, and a faint smile appeared on her face. She moved her body, confidently laying against him, and Ashen laid out his arm for her with a sigh. He wrapped her in his embrace, rubbing his cheek against her hair. "You haven't changed much," he muttered to himself. Meanwhile, Cecilia had a faint smile on, and closed her eyes, feeling a bit better now. Cecilia woke up very slowly to the feeling of someone caressing her arm. Gentle fingers brushed back and forth over her skin, so faintly it was like the wind's soft caress. She smiled and closed her eyes again for a few seconds. She felt good. Her body was still somewhat heavy from everything that happened the previous night, her throat a bit sore and the skin around her eyes a bit dry, but she felt fine. The warm blanket covering her lower body was a perfect balance with the soft, gentle breeze on her skin. She let out a faint breath, opening her eyes again, and turned around to face him. Ashen was seated against the bed's headboard, looking wide awake already, his white hair prettily covering his bare shoulders. From the lighting in the room, still a bit dim, it ought to be quite early. "Good morning," he muttered with a smile. "Good morning. How come you're already awake?" she asked, frowning. The king sighed and looked away. "I think I'm being kept in check." Cecilia frowned and turned her head to the window, where his eyes were staring. She realized it was later in the day than she had thought, but the window was obstructed by a dragon's head. The large, dark scales that blocked most of the lighting of the room had tricked her. The big red eye looking around, Cray let out a grunt. Next to her, Ashen frowned while glaring back. "Seriously?" Unable to hold it anymore, Cecilia giggled and rolled back on the bed to hide her laugh in the pillow. Cray acting like a chaperone and watching the king in his own bed was so incredibly funny. Just imagining how long those two had been staring at each other while she slept peacefully, Cecilia just couldn't stop herself. "I love the sound of your laugh." Those words calmed her down a little. After a second, Cecilia felt Ashen's shadow over her and his body. She stopped laughing, her heartbeat accelerating a little. He left a kiss on her shoulder, sending delicious, warm chills down her spine. His hand gently caressed her arm, and she felt his body against her, his torso against her back, and his lower half against her butt. "Do you feel better?" he asked in a whisper. "Yes." She could feel his hot breath against her neck, his fingers moving her chestnut curls out of the way, and soon after, he left more kisses against her skin. Cecilia blushed a bit, feeling her own body react with delight to this. Not only that, but she could feel Ashen's body reacting to her too. An upset growl made them both jump. "Cray!" Cecilia protested, sitting up. "Go hunt now." The dragon growled back, upset, but the princess kept staring at it. "I am good. Now go." With a high-pitched growl and a loud ruckus against the stone wall, the dragon finally disappeared from their sight, probably flying away to hunt its breakfast. Next to her, Ashen sighed, lying back down on the bed and closing his eyes. "I never thought I'd get blocked by a dragon." Cecilia chuckled a bit, but used their positions to enjoy the view of his exposed body. Now that the sunlight was filling the room, and he was lying down on the bed, she could see more clearly the lines of his body, making her feel hot all over again. The White King really was a warrior, and underneath all his scars, there was a muscular, very attractive body for her to look at. Those scars were covering a lot of the god-like body, though, and each time she saw them, her heart felt a little sad. Cecilia leaned over, and despite feeling a bit shy, she put one of her curls behind her ear and leaned to kiss one of his scars. Ashen shivered underneath her, very faintly, but the king kept his eyes resolutely closed. After a hesitation, Cecilia decided to do it again, picking a different one. This time again, the king's body very visibly reacted to it. "Cecilia, stop." "Why? You don't like it?" He groaned, covering his eyes with his arms. I watched you sleep for 2 hours trying to hold back my desire for you. If you do this now, I really won't be able to hold myself back anymore. So please, don't make it harder than it already is. Goosebumps appeared on her skin from hearing that. She blushed a bit, and, after trying to lick her dry lips, Cecilia caressed the scar she had just kissed with her fingers. Maybe I don't want you to hold yourself back. The king lowered his arms and opened his eyes wide to stare at her, making Cecilia feel so intimidated again. He sat up, facing her from very up close all of a sudden. His dark eyes looked so confused, she couldn't decipher his thoughts as he stared at her silently for a few seconds. Then, his hand gently caressed her cheek, and he took a deep breath in, staring at her with that very serious expression. Then, very slowly, he put a gentle, demure kiss on her lips. While she enjoyed his tenderness, Cecilia was left confused. When their lips parted, she stared at him, a bit at a loss. He looked much calmer now, caressing her cheek and keeping that gentle gaze on her. "Ashen! Not today, my princess," he muttered. "But trust me, it's not that I don't want to," he said to reassure her, caressing her skin once more. "It's just, I love you, Cecilia. I love you like I don't think I'll ever be able to love anyone in this life. I want to treat you like what you are, the most important and precious person in my life." "I'm not that fragile," she retorted. "I know, Ceci," he chuckled, "but you're probably still injured and not fully recovered from last night, and frankly speaking, I don't think I would be able to be gentle with you if we had X now. I just want to wait until it's perfect, all right." However, Cecilia wasn't happy with that response. She pushed him away from her cheek with the back of her hand, a bit annoyed, glaring at him with her fierce green eyes. "You don't want to have X with me, but you told me about all those many other women you slept with already. I hate being the only one you can't have X with. I'm not a girl anymore, and I am fine. Do I have to be the only one to wait?" Ashen sighed, shaking his head. "I'm the only one who deserves to wait," he said. "I wouldn't think twice about sleeping with another woman because, as cold-hearted as that makes me, I don't care about them. I don't care about them as I do about you, and that's exactly why I can't bring myself to do it with you. I don't want to just have X with you, Cecilia, I want to properly make love to you. It is not the same thing. You're the only woman I want to make love to." "But, Ceci." He smiled, and gently brought her hand to his lips. One by one, he softly kissed each of her fingers, making Cecilia's stomach tickle and her cheeks blush again. How could he do this, when he wasn't going to make love to her? She wasn't sure how to feel about this. It was true her body hadn't fully recuperated from the events of the previous night, but it didn't make much of a difference in her desire for Ashen. She was a virgin, but she knew how X was supposed to happen. Her mother and aunt had both educated her on that as soon as she had become a woman. "I love you," he muttered. Cecilia felt her heart melting. Not only at his words but at the way those dark onyx eyes seized her soul, making her feel so awfully confident in his feelings. She had experienced all sorts of things since she had come to his kingdom, but her target, her main objective, had always been Ashen's heart. Now that he was giving it to her, she felt so awfully shy. Cecilia felt like she was thrown back into the past, into that enamored 13-year-old girl who thought she knew it all about love and what she wanted. She felt torn apart. "It's not only that," he added in a whisper. "Last night was a lot for the two of us." His eyes went down to her throat, and Cecilia covered it right away with her hand, remembering her exposed scar. However, Ashen gently took her hand away, to stare at it more. I don't deserve you, right now," he muttered. Ashen, that's not." "I know," he said, "but it is still. I was unfair to you, Ceci. At least, let me properly apologize to you first. Don't let me be more of a dirtbag than I already am by forgiving me too fast. I know I was wrong, and I want to earn back your trust, and my own." Just as he said those words, Cecilia felt something leave her heart. It felt as if it flew off, and freed something inside. She let out a faint sigh, calming down from her previous anger all at once. Ashen wasn't rejecting her. In fact, he wanted to make things right instead, to repair what had been so badly broken between them. She lowered her head. She was really a bit too impatient when it came to him, wasn't she? She suddenly remembered how her father was, with her mom. Her grandmother had talked about this too. How dragons were possessive creatures. Cecilia slowly nodded, more for herself than for Ashen. "I understand," she muttered. "Thank you." He said that with a smile, and gently kissed her hand again. Sitting opposite each other like this on the bed, Cecilia found herself a bit shy, even more so when she remembered she was only wearing one of Ashen's tunics. She pulled the blanket over her legs a little, feeling embarrassed all of a sudden. "Cecilia, I'm also worried about what will happen once I make my interest, no, my feelings toward you clear." She looked up at him again, feeling his serious tone all of a sudden. Ashen was still holding her hand, but his eyes had gone a bit darker, and he seemed determined. "Those people will stop at nothing to get me to do what they want. Last night's murder attempt is only a sample of what they could do. I tried to avoid putting you in their sight, but... Is that why you never tried to talk to me in public?" "That was one of the reasons, yes," he nodded. "Those lords all want me to do what will serve their tribe better. I know some are rather inoffensive like the niece of Councillor Yamano you're always with, but some won't hesitate to murder their rivals to become my queen. You think I would let anyone else become your queen?" Cecilia angrily asked. "No. I'm worried about your security, not you losing this stupid competition." Cecilia sighed, and sat at the edge of the bed, away from him. She brushed her long hair a bit with her fingers, shaking her head. "I want to win this competition, Ashen. Do you think I could choose any other woman than you?" he exclaimed, shocked. Cecilia shook her head, and stood up, walking up to a little table where clean clothes had been left out for a woman. She found clean underwear, a dark pink dress, and a pair of comfortable shoes. "No, but I was serious when I told those vixens I would play by the rules. This is not just about me and you. Those people represent your citizens, Ashen. If I want to become their queen, I can't just force them to trust me. I already know at least a few of them are willing to see what I can do, who I can prove to be. Can you turn around, please? He sighed but turned around. Cecilia began changing quickly, a bit shy as he was right next to her, but she trusted he wouldn't dare peek. I am tired of only being the war god's daughter. Those women hate me because they think that's all I am. A rich dragon master. But I don't really have a dragon anymore, and I don't want to be a fraud. Cecilia, you're not a fraud. Just because you lost Cease doesn't mean you're anything less than those women. I know, but I have to prove it. She sighed, finished changing, and turned around. She walked up to the bed, where Ashen, hearing her come, turned around to face her, sitting on the edge of the mattress with a confused expression. Cecilia gently smiled at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. I realized it when I went to the Muram village, she muttered. You did so much by yourself, but you really do need a queen. Not someone like Giselle, but someone who can do the right things. Cecilia, Giselle is not. Her sudden, angry expression convinced him to shut up right there. He swallowed his words right back into his throat, while the princess was glaring at him. I don't want to know, she hissed. Don't talk about that woman now. He didn't dare add anything to that. He could have mentioned she had brought up his mistress first, but after seeing Cecilia's furious, green eyes, so much like her father's when she was upset, he didn't. The young princess had the eyes of someone who knew how to threaten and uphold it. She had the eyes of a real dragon tamer. After a few seconds of heavy, guilt-filled silence had passed, Ashen cleared his throat a bit. So, you want us to remain a secret for now, he muttered. You really want to do this competition? Yes, she nodded, but I am not letting any other woman have you. I know, he chuckled. I swear it's not going to happen, ever again, as long as you're with me. I just want to look forward to when we can truly be together. Cecilia nodded and took the initiative to kiss him this time. The king answered her kiss right away, his hands going around her body, caressing her gently. Although they had both agreed on that, she could feel it would be hard to wait. She was feeling hot just from the gentle caresses on her body, and she regretted not staying in that bed a bit longer. Your Majesty! Someone knocked at the door. My apologies, Your Majesty, but the councillors and lords are waiting for you for the meeting. Ashen glared at the door, back to his usual White King cold demeanor. Cecilia chuckled and kissed his cheek gently. I'll get going first, she whispered. Do you think we can see each other again soon? He sighed and caressed her hair, staring at her as if he wanted to capture each of her traits in his mind. His fingers gently followed her curls to their end before he slowly nodded. I'll come to you, he muttered. Believe me, Ceci. I won't disappoint you again. I promise. He gently caressed her cheek, making Cecilia feel even better. She nodded, and they kissed once more, a more candid kiss this time, just enough to say goodbye, although neither of them wanted to part. The king sighed, his fingers still in her hair. When the servant knocked at the door again, he glared. I'm coming, he shouted, upset. You should go out after me. Servants will definitely speculate after I asked for women's clothes to be brought earlier, but they might not see you if I have them all follow me, so I don't need to go out by the door," chuckled Cecilia. She left another quick kiss on his cheek, and this time, slowly stepped back, grabbing the fur coat that had been left on the chair to wrap it around her. In front of Ashen's shocked eyes, Cecilia climbed up the window until she was on the edge of it, and gave him a little wink. "See you tonight," she whispered. The next second, she jumped out. Ashen's heart dropped, but right after, he heard the familiar flap of the wings of a dragon. So her father's dragon hadn't left after all. He didn't know how to feel about that. Eventually, a smile appeared on his lips, and he had to hide it with his hand when the servants walked in. The bold princess hadn't changed much, after all. Cecilia landed effortlessly on Cray, but it did remind her that her body was indeed still healing from the previous night. Maybe Ashen wasn't wrong about waiting a little. She grimaced a bit, and adjusted her position on the dragon's back, patting its neck. "Cray, you're going to have to learn to give me some personal space now. I need to have a life without you watching me all the time." The dragon growled a bit, unhappy with the idea. Cray flew off quietly around the castle, taking Cecilia farther away, over the sea. Since the downpour from the previous night had passed, the waves seemed a bit calmer, letting her enjoy the gentle morning breeze. There were a few boats still at sea, fishermen coming back late from their morning outing. Some let their jaws fall or pointed at the dragon in awe, and to Cecilia's surprise, a few even waved at them, perhaps some of Neptune's relatives. She smiled back, but they were quickly beyond the fishermen's line of sight, with nothing but sea ahead. On the dragon's back, she made Cray fly lower so that she could see the sea animals jumping out of the waves, probably unaware of the dangers of a gigantic dragon above them. A couple of unlucky fish found themselves jumping out of the water, never to return after being eaten in one bite. Cecilia let the dragon eat as it wanted and enjoyed the warmth of the sun and the freshness of the wind on her skin. She loved flying. Her father had taken her to the skies since she was a child to get her used to it, for when her own dragon would be big enough to let her fly on its back. Her heart broke a little each time she remembered seas. Her dragon would have loved the Eastern Kingdom and its sea. "Cray, let's find Tessa and Nana now," she said. The dragon growled happily, making a little joyful jump in the air, and slowly began to turn around, heading back to the Eastern Kingdom. It looked like the black dragon definitely associated Nana's name with the perspective of a yummy little treat. In just a few minutes, they were back above the Eastern Kingdom's capital. Far ahead, on the horizon, Cecilia could see the very large chain of mountains that made up the border, sometimes replaced by man-made walls. A little nostalgic smile appeared when she thought of her family, and she wondered if her younger siblings missed her. As the eldest sister, she was often the one who helped her mother look after them, and as a result, all the younger ones had grown close to her, especially Satara, her littlest sister. She missed each of her siblings, as well as her parents, but it was also her first adventure away from them, and she felt a little proud, for someone who had rarely left her family's domain. She was starting to understand her sister Kiara's feelings, as she was constantly running away from familial surveillance. Cray let out a little growl, and Cecilia looked down. The dragon had already found her cousin and their friend, both waving at her, Sabale with them. They had apparently decided to have breakfast downtown, near the port. The dragon swiftly landed on one of the port's docks, under all the fishermen's shocked eyes. Cray was larger than any of the boats there, and, although the dragon's front paws got on one of the docks, the lower part of its body was quietly floating, or maybe paddling underwater. While the large dragon curiously sniffed the closest stalls, Cecilia jumped off its back, Nana and Tessa running to her. "Lady Cecilia!" exclaimed Nana, all smiles. "How are you? Are you feeling better? I am so glad His Majesty came to our rescue yesterday." "Oh, good morning, Sir Dragon." "Good morning, Nana. I'm all right, thank you. How about you guys? Did you get back safely?" Now that she saw them, Cecilia realized she had no idea about what had happened to her friends after the attack last night, and felt awfully guilty about it. Luckily, they seemed fine, although she spotted some green scales on Tessa's arms and a bandage on Nana's shoulder. Her cousin sighed. "We're fine," she said. "Looks like those people were targeting you more than us. Sab and I had no trouble getting rid of them, it just took a while. We tried to capture some of them, but they committed suicide." "We think they were hired," grumbled Sabale, his eyes on the dragon. "They had common mercenary tattoos on their bodies. I put in a request at the guild, but I doubt those who hired them had a proper contract. We found some money on several of them, which we confiscated, of course," added Tessa with a cunning smile, "which is why we're having a victory feast this morning." "Have you eaten, Ceci?" Cecilia could tell her cousin's question was not as light-hearted as it seemed, as Tessa was tilting her head with an accusatory look. She blushed, realizing her cousin was definitely going to roast her for spending the night with a man, and the king himself, no less. To avoid Tessandra's stare, she turned to Nana, who was already convincing one of her uncles or cousins to feed the dragon before Cray helped itself. "I'm sorry for leaving you, Nana, especially when you came back for me." "Oh no, don't worry. It's not like I was of much use anyway. I am sorry I couldn't help much, and glad we all made it back safely." Cecilia sighed but walked up to her to hug the young lady, who happily hugged her back. When they parted, she could see that Neptune's expression was a bit serious, the young lady frowning. "You know, Lady Cecilia, I've decided. I always wanted to become a scholar, but I really wasn't sure what kind. From now on, I will work hard to become a royal counselor, like my uncle. I hope you will become queen, so I can keep helping you and advising you this way. I may not be a fighter, but I have confidence in my knowledge." "Thank you, Nana," said Cecilia, smiling. "You will be an amazing counselor." The young lady blushed, smiling widely and visibly proud of Cecilia's comment. "Oh, what do you want to eat?" she asked. "We're having some of my cousin's herbal soup and of course some buns, but I can ask for more for you." Cecilia let Nana take her to the market, while Cray stayed behind, its tail making little waves in the water, very happy to be fed by the curious fishermen. For a while, Cecilia was only too happy to eat what she was given and chat about the soup's rumored healing properties and ingredients. However, it was hard to ignore her cousin's intense, suspicious stare on her all the while. Tessandra was following closely, her arms crossed and her lips pinched in a pout that reminded her of their grandmother on bad days. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.